While plenty of the greatest horror films of all time contain iconic opening scenes, many others opt to take their time ratcheting up the stakes, creating a sense of palatable dread first. This is especially true in our current era deemed post-horror by many critics. These films utilize narrative structure to explore horror as a metaphor for something intangible. The Babadook is a metaphor for depression and grief. Hereditary is an exploration of familial trauma and inherited illness. These filmmakers opt for the slow burn approach, which grounds the events in a less heightened manner. As a result, we do lose some of the immediate catharsis a good opening horror scene can release. When cinephiles discuss greatest opening horror scenes, a few standouts are inevitably brought up. The revolutionary POV sequence in Halloween, the phone call from Scream that seemingly killed off its supposed lead, the serenity of Amity Island before Jaws shows up. But one overlooked cult classic contains what I believe to be the most effective opening scene to a horror movie of all time. That film is the 1986 horror action thriller The Hitcher, directed by Robert Harmon and written by Near Dark writer Eric Red. The story of The Hitcher starts out simply enough. A tired young man driving across the country begins to fall asleep behind the wheel. After nearly crashing his vehicle into oncoming traffic, he picks up a hitchhiker as a means of distraction in order to stay awake. The premise, even then, was nothing new. The hitchhiker is always personified in existential horror in all media. The Twilight Zone episode The Hitchhiker utilized a drifting hitchhiker in its first season as a personification of death and the unknown that awaits us in the afterlife. Inspired by the lyrics of The Doors' Riders on the Storm about a drifting psychopath, The Hitcher's premise is inherently troubling. Imagine picking up a stranger on the road. You know nothing of their past or what kind of person they are. You're inviting them to sit in close proximity while you're in a particularly vulnerable position behind the wheel. Like any great horror film, this opening scene functions as a microcosm for what the entire film will be. The entirety of the rest of the film is focused on the cat and mouse chase between C. Thomas Howell's Jim Halsey and the great late Rutger Hauer's titular hitchhiker named John Ryder. The opening scene puts the predator and prey too close for comfort. As the audience, there's no question that something is wrong. The only remaining question is when things will go wrong. From the jump, the hitchhiker's demeanor is odd. He avoids small talk and his answers to Jim's questions are purposefully opaque and misleading.
You gonna tell me where you're going?
Yeah, sure.
Part of what makes the scene work is the context of the situation and how it's set up. Normally I hate seeing characters, especially in horror films, make dumb decisions. While some say that without characters making such dumb decisions, there would be no reason for the movie's events to unfold or occur, I view this as a cop-out. There should always be at least a modicum of reasoning for characters doing what they do. Even when watching the greatness that is the opening of Scream, I find myself asking why Drew Barrymore's character doesn't hang up or call the cops when Ghostface is literally terrorizing her for minutes on end. The near-fatal car wreck Jim almost gets himself into gives us a reason to excuse his poor decision-making in picking up the Hitcher. This gives the rest of the film the power to do anything it wants to as the scene plays out. A lesser film would rush to make things turn violent and ratchet up the stakes as soon as possible. However, The Hitcher takes its time with the opening scene, having the protagonist and antagonist's first meeting play out over 9 agonizing minutes long. Unlike Halloween, there is no inventive camera work or iconic score to provide atmosphere. The Hitcher's opening contains no music and the camera work is quite static, alternating between close-ups of our two leads, with an occasional establishing shot here or there. What allows the scene to work is the dialogue and the actors' performances, particularly the magnetic Rutger Hauer's. The Hitcher starts out polite enough. He shakes Jim's hand, introduces himself, and apologizes for even getting his car wet.
I'm getting your car wet.
Oh, this isn't my car. It's a drive away. The guy who owns it's in San Diego.
But within less than 30 seconds, things become quite troubling. He doesn't answer Jim when he asks where he's headed, and then sternly grabs his leg when Jim slows down to inspect a car by the side of the road, causing him to speed off. From here, the Hitcher's demeanor becomes bubbly and taunting. A lesser actor would play the scene straight with a stoic nature, trying to be scary 100% of the time. Rutger Hauer's villainous monster plays with his prey and allows for moments of levity. Even after commanding Jim to keep on driving after Jim unsuccessfully tries to kick him out after grabbing his leg,
You're gonna drive.
he does say excuse me after blowing his nose.
Excuse me.
Finally, he answers Jim's initial question and says he needs gas and would like to stop at a gas station. Satisfied with this answer, Jim thinks all is well. That is until the final reveal.
I don't need gas.
What do you want? What's so funny?
That's what the other guy said.
Him in the car?
I'm sure it was. Could have walked very far. Because I cut off his legs. And his arms. And his head. And I'm gonna do the same to you.
All bets are off at this point. There is no illusion to what kind of danger lies ahead from this point on. Just when we think all hope is lost, we are relieved to see that an encroaching roadblock is ahead. We rejoice. However, the Hitcher holds a switchblade to Jim's groin and threatens him not to say anything that'll alert the construction worker. In a twist of dramatic irony, the construction worker sees the Hitcher's grip on Jim and mistakes them for lovers before dismissing them and telling them to drive off.
Come on, get going, sweetheart.
This moment solidifies our protagonist's fatal flaw. He is not a man of action. He takes too much time to analyze situations and even tries to appear polite to his would-be attacker. He doesn't want to cause waves.
Please. I'll do anything.
However, civility will not save him or garner empathy from the Hitcher. In fact, the Hitcher tells this to Jim.
Crying isn't gonna help.
Almost taunting him for his lack of backbone and paralyzing fear. Unlike the killers in most slashers or even thrillers, our antagonist likes to engage in dialogue with the would-be victim, almost establishing rapport with them. They may just be another notch on his kill count belt, but he wants to savor the encounter and make it special. As great as Rutger Hauer is, C. Thomas Howell sells the emotion of his character. While we may view him as responsible for his predicament, he comes off as human and fully aware of the gravity of the situation he's gotten himself into. His following actions, however, grant him agency, and we see that he is more than competent enough to lead this film as an active and reasonably smart character. Egged on enough by the Hitcher's cruel dare to say,
I
Want
what?
To die.
he finally takes his chance and boots the Hitcher out of the car, securing his first and perhaps only victory for the rest of the film.
I don't want to die!
The emotional catharsis of this moment is what cinema is made
Yeah! Yeah! Fuck you, buddy!
for. We're practically cheering for Jim. Again, this structure is pretty unique. Most horror films do not introduce our protagonist to the monster from the jump. In almost any other film, we'd see the Hitcher kill his first victim before even meeting the protagonist. Having Jim face the big bad and win his first battle seems like poor narrative choice on paper. After all, it emasculates the antagonist, rendering him vulnerable and almost human in a way. But the last shot of the Hitcher slowly getting up, seemingly unfazed by the fall, communicates an almost cosmic sense of horror. This monster is almost Lovecraftian in his unknowability, minus the tentacles. He is flesh and bone, but personifies a void of humanity. While the rest of the film is a livelier affair, stacking up the body count and functioning more as an action horror rather than a psychological horror film, the minimalism of its opening is the most memorable part of the film for me. This is something sorely missed in the 2007 remake, which stars Sean Bean as the titular Hitcher. The remake's version of the opening eschews many of the things that made the original opening so memorable. Generic stock music tells us how to feel at any given moment. In this version, our Jim is traveling with his girlfriend, which immediately stacks the odds in the couple's favor as there are two of them and only one of him. Unfortunately, the legacy of The Hitcher is somewhat complicated and hard to define. A box office flop upon its release, critics regarded it as another slasher flick. Ebert gave it 0 stars, although he did acknowledge the technical marvels of the film.
Trying to make some kind of a statement, and the statement they're trying to make turns out to be a very sick one because, of course, the symbolism at the end of the movie indicates that this young man, having now killed the Hitcher, has become the Hitcher. In other words, this will become his mission to go and find another young victim and torture him, so that the movie is extremely sick.
Others compared it to Steven Spielberg's debut film, Duel. The Hitcher's opening has and never will be part of the popular cultural zeitgeist or in the larger discussion about horror films. But its opening scene reminds us what a great opening scene can do for a horror film. As always, thanks for watching, and let me know what future films and topics you'd like to discuss, either in an episode of Films That Time Forgot or some entirely new segment. This is the Chronic Cinephile signing off.